Welcome back to the Barley Lads. Today we're reviewing Jack Daniels. This is Jack Daniels Old No. 7. It's a Tennessee whiskey out of the Jack Daniels Distillery in Lynchburg, Tennessee. ABV of 40% or 80 proof. This is a non-age statement, but it's a minimum of 4 years old. Price-wise, you should be able to get this around $25. For the mash bill, 80% corn, 12% barley, and 8% rye. So Jack Daniels has been around since 1875. The name comes from Jack Daniels, and he got his start. He was taken in by a preacher in the 1850s when he was a teenager, and was also a moonshine distiller, so he was learning from him. At the time, there was an enslaved man named Nearest Green, also working with the preacher and Jack Daniels. After emancipation, he became a freedman and continued working with Jack Daniels and followed him to the Jack Daniels Distillery. And it's also where the Uncle Nearest line comes from, Nearest Green, which has become a very popular whiskey in the last 5 years or so. The thing about Tennessee whiskey is it is bourbon in all but name. So it has to be, to be labeled straight whiskey, it has to be at least 4 years old. I think Jack Daniels is in the 4 to 7 year range. And it's at least 51% corn. For this one, it's actually 80%. And it goes through a different process after the distillation, where it goes through a vat of 10-foot vat of maple charcoal. So it's filtered before it goes into the barrel. And they say that it gives it the extra smoothness and sweetness that you get from a Tennessee whiskey. So while it is bourbon in all but name, as I said, Tennessee doesn't want to be known as a bourbon. It wants to be known as a Tennessee whiskey. So the interesting thing is the Jack Daniels Distillery county is actually in a dry county, so you can't buy Jack Daniels outside of the distillery anywhere in the county. And Jack Daniels actually got shut down in 1910 because Tennessee passed a prohibition law before the U.S. prohibition about 10 years later, and Jack Daniels fought it but lost. So he moved his distillation to St. Louis in Alabama. None of that ever saw the inside of a bottle because they had so many production issues. So he wasn't able to produce again until the end of Prohibition, but even then, Tennessee's laws were still in effect until 1938. At that point, when he finally started to distill again, he was again shut down by World War II, when the distillation was outlawed to save for grain rationing for the troops and for families at home. And so he was able to reopen again in 1946, and after that, Jack Daniels has always had a place on the shelf in most bars around the U.S. So as I said, it is similar to a bourbon. You definitely get the caramel and vanilla, and you do get almost like a maple syrup influence, I assume, from the maple charcoal. The interesting thing about Jack Daniels is a lot of people say that they get a banana note, and I do a little bit. It's almost like a over-ripened banana. Yeah. On the taste, you definitely get more of the corn with that 80%. It's fairly high corn in the mash bill. You still get that banana. It's a little weird, but I will admit that it is very smooth. I'm not a Tennessee whiskey guy, but Jack Daniels is as smooth as it gets for a, we'll call it a bourbon, this style of whiskey. The finish is oaky, very sweet, like almost like a cereal sweetness, and you still get some honey. And the last thing about Tennessee whiskey, just like bourbon, you can't add color. So this is the color that you get from the barrels. So it has a good age on it. Quality whiskey for the price. Like I said, about $25 for this. And it can be enjoyed in a Jack and Coke or neat just like this. Thank you again for watching another episode of the Barley Lads. Today we've been talking about Jack Daniels. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to get notifications when we post new videos. Cheers.